Hello, 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 everybody. It's Susie McMahon with my virtual book club coming to you live tonight back in the USA. Can you believe it? My last place was Sardinia, Italy. And oh my, if you ever want to talk about that place, I'm here to relish some information. But I am here tonight with our featured author, Natalie Jenner. She's in the picture below. Hello. And also, first time group expert, Karen Weesey from Texas. Everybody may know her and may have met her when we were here in Beaufort for the Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway. But tonight, I just wanted to welcome both of you. Natalie, where are you coming to us from?
Right outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Wonderful. And Karen, you're in Texas tonight?
Dallas, Texas. Yep.
Wonderful. Welcome, ladies. So we're going to be together for about 35 minutes tonight. And when you come online, everybody in the book club, let me know where you're watching from. And please feel free to put some questions in the field to make it more of an interactive experience. And of course, we'll always share it, the recorded version, but it's always so much more fun when we are live. So I'm going to start by reading just a simple bio that I received today from my friend Natalie. If I can get my picture, I did, a screenshot so it would be all perfectly here. And of course, I'm stumbling on my phone. But everybody, let's talk about Natalie. Natalie Jenner is the internationally best-selling author of the Jane Austen Society and Bloomsbury Girls, which were both instant national bestsellers. Congratulations. Amazon Best Books of the Month, Indie Next Picks, and People Magazine Books of the Week. Natalie's third novel, Every Time We Say Goodbye, is scheduled for release in early 2024. Born in England and raised in Canada, Natalie has been a corporate lawyer and career coach and once owned an independent bookstore in Oakville, Ontario, where she lives with her family and 2 rescue dogs. Welcome, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Susie and Karen. Thank you both for having me tonight. So excited.
Thanks. It looks like we have some members watching from here in Beaufort, South Carolina, and also Grand Junction, Colorado so far. Natalie, can you elaborate a little bit on your bio and tell us a little bit about your inspiration to become an author in the first place? You have a very romantic historical view on your writing, your research, I'm sure, and what you love in your own life. But can you just add a little bit more embellishment to your bio for us?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to be a writer before I could read. And my mother said I would wander around the house going, nee, 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 like just like putting little scribbles down, and fell in love with books like I'm sure everyone watching tonight is a lover of books. And books were something that I just ate up, couldn't get enough of, total bookworm, went off to university, did a degree in English literature, knew I also wanted to be a lawyer, pursued law, and spent my 20s building a career in corporate M&A and securities. And then when I was getting close to 30, I was like, there's other things I want to do. And it's a demanding mistress, the law. And I really wanted to try and get published. So I wrote my first book when I was 30. That was my sort of drop dead date. And nobody cared. And I beat that dog dead. I flung it out all over the world to hundreds of agents everywhere, and nobody cared. And I kept going, and I wrote 4 more books in my 30s. And when I was 40, I realized, there were other things I needed to attend to. So I stopped trying to write and get published for 10 years. And in my late 40s, I opened the bookshop because I wanted books to still be a bigger part of my life. And unfortunately, just 4 months after opening it, my husband was diagnosed out of the blue with a very rare genetic and terminal form of lung disease. He's actually beating the statistics right now. But at the time, we were given 2 to 3 years. We were a young family. Our daughter was 14. And I lost myself in Jane Austen, and she saved me. I get very emotional because she was like, it was her books and everything about her life and how she got through stuff and how she wrote during her illnesses. And I also watched a lot of Cheers and Frasier and Downton Abbey. But those were my, I think with the pandemic, everyone found where their safe spots were, right? And at the end of this year of reading Jane Austen, I wanted to kind of thank her. And I took a trip to the little village where she had lived and worked on most of her books. And while I was there, I kind of found new hope. It was very, very bizarre. I'm not a religious person necessarily. It was very spiritual kind of experience, was being in her footsteps. And I came home, and 6 months later, I wanted to write about how she had saved me, her literary therapy. But also I wanted to, I think, create a group of people that I could talk to about her books and have a dialogue with, create a book club in a weird way. And I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was just going to go back to writing, but I think I wanted to create like a little book club. And then my husband said, I think you should send this out. I think this is special. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do it again. I don't want to invite rejection into my life right now. And things are so medically chaotic, but I went ahead, and my agent in New York grabbed it on a Monday morning and signed me by Wednesday. And 6 months later, I went up for submission in New York to the Big Five, and was in a bidding war, and my life was totally changed. So it was crazy. And then, of course, the book released a few months after the pandemic, called The Jane Austen Society. And I was very fortunate. It was a USA Today bestseller, and it did very well in several countries, and has sold, I think, in almost 24 countries for translation around the world, and has been optioned for film and TV. And while this was all going on, I was in lockdown with my husband because he has lung disease. So the first year of the pandemic, before the vaccines, was particularly scary for us. So I disappeared into this book. I wanted to be back in a bookstore. I'd owned a bookstore. I missed bookstores. I didn't get to see my first book in a bookstore for a year. I really wanted to be in that environment. So that was what I pitched to my publisher. Fortunately, they were interested. And it's the same world. Some of the characters continue, but they're standalone books. I try to write so that if you haven't read the previous book, you can still just jump into it. I've had a lot of people actually, after they read this, go back and read the Jane Austen Society for the first time, which is so flattering and really interesting to me. So that's how I got here.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. And I just want to let you know that whatever we believe, I had chills while you were telling it. And it is kind of to me, it is a spiritual story where it gave you what you needed at the time, and what a success, a passion project that has obviously been extremely fruitful. And thank you for sharing your story and your time with us tonight. I'll be one of those people in between other books to go back and read your Jane Austen Society. I'm very intrigued by it all, and looking forward to the next, the continuation in your next book. So Karen, do you have a question for Natalie tonight? I know you came up with 3 very in-depth questions. Why don't you just ask whichever one's on the top of your mind?
Well, I was curious. I had not read your first book, but I was curious at what point you kind of realized you had a second book coming that would focus on Evie Stone, and how you happened to come upon the Mummy and latch onto that as the impetus for getting her into the Bloomsbury bookstore.
So I write very intuitively. So when I write, I just start typing, and it was like the Jane Austen Society is out in the world. It's doing well. It's the end of May. And I say to my agent, I'm talking about these characters a lot and I'm missing them. And the one that it makes the most sense to follow would be Evie. So in a weird way, Karen, it was the promotion of the first book that led to, it was the discussions of those characters so much at events that I was invited to, fortunately, that led to this sort of spark of, she's the least settled. I wanted everyone else to be left happy where they were. She's the one that has her life ahead of her, still has to find, hopefully, a partner, a career. And then I was missing bookstores. And I actually, ironically, had given my publicist a early American edition of a book called 84 Charing Cross Road, which is a favorite novel of mine, and an amazing Netflix movie right now with Anne Bancroft and Anthony Hopkins on Netflix from the 80s. And I really was watching that movie a lot and thinking about bookshops and the different characters. And so that's sort of how it all came together. But I don't outline or plot. So I didn't really know what was going to happen. So I was writing the book not knowing that the Mummy was going to show up. In fact, Karen, to be absolutely honest, I surprise myself when I write. Everything that surprises you surprises me. So I don't know that Alec and Vivian have a past until Alec takes her wrist. And then I stop typing. I go, oh my God. They've already been together. I didn't know that. I thought they had a romance ahead. And with the Mummy, I didn't know that Evie took the job for an ulterior motive. I thought she just needed a job and she was upset, and then things would spiral from there. But I remember typing the line, but it's like, it's okay. She's got time. She's been planning this for a while, why she's taken this job at this bookshop. And then the subtext obviously is that she knows that there's something there. And at that moment I was like, what could it be? So the last thing about The Mummy, which is the book, the literary mystery, the heart of this book, is that I couldn't pick a book that was real, that had been written by anybody famous. Because by 1950, they would know, an Emily Bronte novel, woohoo, a new Jane Austen. I was like, I've got to find something no one's ever heard of. And so I started to Google anonymously authored books, thinking that would be the direction I would go in. And there was a book written in the 1700s, and it is about the kingdom of George VI. And it's forecasting a reign of a male monarch of England called George, right in the 20th century, who's going to preside over a global world war. And this is written in the 18th century. And I thought that was really fascinating, but I still wasn't. So that entry in Wikipedia for that book led me to other famous undiscovered sort of things. And somehow that led me to The Mummy. And the minute I realized it was written by a woman, it was written by a young woman, Evie's age. It was written by a woman who ultimately sort of gave up her fiction writing career for a nonfiction writing career to support her husband's own interests in the area of trees and flowers. She becomes a gardening writer. And also it is the first example of a true science fiction novel in terms of imagining what the future will look like. Not fantasy per se, but in the future, will we have cars, locomotives, TVs, whatever. It was the first book to really do that. It was written in 1827. And I remember thinking this was perfect, but I couldn't believe my luck. I'm a very lucky writer. And I, for about a month, kept looking for other things. And then one day I was taking a walk with the dogs with my husband, and I went, you know what? It was staring me right in front of the face. It's The Mummy. That's the book that Evie's looking for. That's how it came about.
Wow. So cool. I have kind of a little follow-up on that. So Evie is fictional, I guess. You made up Evie, is that right?
Yeah.
But The Mummy, of course, is real, and actually you can buy it on Amazon today.
Yeah, it just got reissued like last year.
Yeah. So so Evie discovers it in your novel, but do you know how it actually got discovered?
So that's a really great question, Karen. No one's ever asked me that before. What I do know is that it was mentioned very briefly in an anthology of the British novel. And as a historical fiction writer, I felt it behooved me to mention that there was a citation of this book in the 20th century, that it wasn't completely missing. So I made it Evie's fault that she had just missed this one catalog entry, because that can happen. And then bizarrely, it was a Wisconsin Literary Gazette did a critical review of it in 1949 in real life, of abridged version of it. And it went up, I think it went up for auction about 15 years ago, a first edition. And I took the amount it sold and then indexed it backwards to the 1950 currency exchange rate to the American dollar, and then inflation, and factored that all in, and thought it would make sense that it would have sold for £3,000 based on what it sold for recently. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of bizarre that's the former lawyer in me. I must apologize. But I do want as much as possible to either be like not disobeying or not respecting, if it does exist in real life, to work with that as a goalpost and work around that. So Evie's really fictional, but in terms of like in real life, like I don't think any real recognition of it was made until the 60s. And I've had some very lovely people reach out to me who have actually are scholars in science fiction and fantasy, and they've sent me articles and essays that they've written on this. And so, yeah, it really was dormant until not until now, but until after the first half of the 20th century.
Interesting story.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I have a couple of questions that have come across the chat, and one is from Shoshana, watching from Dallas as well. It's so fun. She first, as a comment, thank you for listing the characters inside the shop and outside the shop at the beginning of the book. She really liked that touch. And then also on a personal nature, again, given that you wrote this book during a difficult time, the pandemic, is there a special takeaway that you're hoping your readers will get from your novel?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Jane Austen Society, I was writing very much about people coming out of grief and having to find a way to put a foot forward 1 inch, just keep going. And it's very much about finding sources of hope, as small as those are. And they can be through connection over books. With this book, I think what I was really exploring was that work is a community. And in a weird way, I think I also started to binge watch The Office for the first time, the NBC TV series. I think we were all missing during that year that camaraderie that you get from being at work, even with people that you don't always, maybe wouldn't even be friends with them outside of work. And I was really wanting to explore that sort of workplace relationships, like the work wives, and the best friends. And I've had a long corporate career, 30 years of working at our version of Wall Street in Toronto called King and Bay, and blue chip, law firms, et cetera. And I've had a career with so many teams, and I've had so much fun. And I really wanted to kind of capture, even though there's obviously some antagonistic stuff going on in the bookshop, how you can find those friendships through work. That was important to me. The overarching message in the end, Shoshana, I think, is that there is always a way to find and create opportunity. And you can't just rely on luck. You do have to, unfortunately, sometimes put yourselves out there and build connections, ask for help. I'm a former career coach. I'm very big on, if you see someone who's figured it out and you want what they have, is, literally finding a way to approach them and say, like, I want to be you when I grow up. Do you have any advice? And I was always coaching very young people starting out in their careers as well as people at the end. And I think it's really important to always connect as much as possible in any given situation and not impose on it. Like, I'm just in an elevator, I'm just in line at the grocery store, or I'm just in a waiting room. Is to just look at people and to be curious and open to the possibility of connecting with a new human being. And I think that it was that I wanted people to take away, is that it can lead to these really odd, magical moments. And I guess the tie-up of all of that is that the one part of the book that is true in terms of relationships is that there was a writer in real life. It's not Vivian, but there was a writer in real life that was at a party for Ellen Doubleday and was waiting in the hallway because Ellen was late as usual, and meets this woman. And for several days does not find out that this woman is Daphne du Maurier. And even escorts Daphne du Maurier, goes with her and her daughter up to the Bronte parsonage because they're all big fans of the Brontes. And I remember reading that. And I remember thinking, it's on a great website called Something Rhymed. And I remember reading it and going, no one would believe that could happen in real life. And people have actually questioned that in my book. And I'm like, ironically, that's the thing that happened. That just this hallway meeting led to this woman meeting Daphne du Maurier and having her as her mentor, as a writer. And I was like, oh, I can't not put that in my book.
That's fantastic. Let's have Karen ask you a quick question, and then we'll segue into my favorite part of our meetings is when an author reads to us from their own work. But Karen, what other question do you have for Natalie?
Oh, well, let's see. One of the things that I particularly enjoyed about your writing was how believable all the characters were, and you say of Vivian's writing in your book, or the people comment on her writing in your book, how she's good with dialogue, and I felt that especially about you as well. I don't know who was channeling whom, but and I found it particularly interesting because it was not just the external dialogue between characters, but also their internal dialogue, which several of them do quite a bit of, kind of rehashing what's going on. And anyway, I wonder if you comment on that. And
That is
helped in your writing?
Yeah, it's a very kind of classic literary device that is not in fashion at all. And so people have asked me about it. It's quite Victorian. It was invented by Jane Austen, and it's free and direct discourse. And it is the presence of an omniscient narrative voice who knows everything. So when I write that the literary luncheon with Daphne du Maurier led to a cascading chain of events from which Bloomsbury Books was never to recover, that's not me saying that, it's the narrator, but the narrator knows everything. So the narrator is a character in themselves. And then because of this omniscient narrative voice, which is like a fly on the wall, telling you everything, like a camera looking down, and then the camera goes into different people's behind their eyes, and basically you get to see how they see things. I think if you keep it to a strict third person and you don't go into people's heads, for me as a writer, I lose those opportunities for the irony and the humor that I loved in like a writer like Jane Austen, which is the dichotomy between what you think is going on and what's really going on. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'm really attracted to in life. So I love this narrative device partly for that reason. I also do feel it enables you to build allegiance between the reader and many different characters. It allows me to have a Victorian size cast like Dickens would have, where there's 8 characters in the Jane Austen Society, 9 characters in Bloomsbury Girls. I think there's just as many in my third book. And the point is that it's hard to keep so many characters separate. But if you can go into their heads and reinforce what someone has said about them through their own interpretation of events or their behavior, you have different ways to distinguish that character from others. And so it's just a really helpful device. The final thing to say about the way that I write is that I write to bring together a bunch of disparate characters and find how they're going to connect and find a way for them to connect despite their differences. That's ultimately, I think, what every one of my books is about. And so with this narrative device, I get to do that. And I wouldn't get to do that if I was doing the first person, that very memoir-esque or that thriller voice. That wouldn't work for the kind of story that I want to tell. So my narrative device works for me. And every writer has made choices that are the best for the story that they want to tell. And that's what I find so fascinating about author chats, right? Is like every author has a different process, but we all end up with the book. So
I love that. I did feel allegiance with all of your characters, all their flaws, and I mean, it's just, there's something to like about all of them, or there's kind of a generosity of spirit in the way you write about each of them.
Thank you. Yeah, I love them all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. With that, Natalie, I know that you have an excerpt chosen to read to everyone. I'm going to play around with the screen so I can mostly have you, so it might take me a second. But everyone, stop what you're doing. You're going to hear directly from Natalie Jenner from her work, Bloomsbury Girls.
So this is the beginning of chapter 2. And it's basically going to give you, you did it. It's going to give you background to the store that's at the heart of this novel. Oh, and one of the characters is nicknamed the Tyrant by the other women working there. So this is how it starts. The Tyrant was Alec McDonough, a bachelor in his early 30s who ran the new books, fiction, and art departments on the ground floor of Bloomsbury Books. He had read literature and fine art at the University of Bristol and had been planning on a career in something big. Vivian accused him of wanting to run a small colony when the war had intervened. Following his honorable discharge in 1945, Alec had joined the shop on the exact same day as Vivian. By an hour ahead, like a dominant twin, she would quip, whenever Alec was rewarded with anything first. From the start, Alec and Vivian were rivals, and not just for increasing control of the fiction floor. Every editor that wandered in, every literary guest speaker, was a chance for them to have access to the powers that be in the publishing industry. As two secretly aspiring writers, they had each come to London and taken the position at Bloomsbury Books for this reason. But they were also both savvy enough to know that the men in charge were whom they first needed to please. Alec had a clear and distinct advantage when it came to that. Between the tales of wartime service, shared grammar schools, and past cricket match victories, Vivian grew quickly dismayed at her own possibilities for promotion. Sure enough, within weeks, Alec had entrenched himself with both the long-standing general manager Herbert Dutton and his right-hand man, Frank Allen. By 1948, upon the retirement of Graham Kingsley, Alec had ascended to the post of head of fiction, and within the year had added new books and art to his oversight, an achievement that Vivian still referred to as the annexation. She had been first to call him the tyrant, and he called her nothing at all. Vivian's issues with Alec ranged from the titles they stocked on the shelves to his preference for booking events exclusively with male authors who had served in the war. With her own degree in literature from Durham, Vivian had rigorously informed views on the types of books that the fiction department should carry. Not surprisingly, Alec disputed these views. But he doesn't even read women, Vivian would bemoan to Grace, who would nod back in sympathy while trying to remember her grocery list before the bus journey home. I mean, what? One Jane Austen on the shelves? No Catherine Mansfield, no Porter. I read that Salinger story, the New Yorker, he keeps going on about shell-shocked soldiers and children all over the place. I don't see what's so masculine about that. Unlike Vivian, Grace did not have much time for personal reading, an irony her husband often pointed out. But Grace did not work at the shop for the books. She worked there because the bus journey into Bloomsbury took only 20 minutes. She could drop the children off at school on the way, and she could take the shop newspapers home at the end of the day. Grace had been the one to suggest that they also carry import magazines, in particular the New Yorker. Being so close to the British Museum and the Theater District, Bloomsbury Books received its share of wealthy American tourists. Grace was convinced that such touches from home would increase their time spent browsing, along with jazz music on the wireless by the front cache, one of many ideas that Mr. Dutton was still managing to resist. Vivian and Alec had manned the ground floor of the shop together for over 4 years, circling each other within the front cash counter like wary lions inside a small coliseum. The square enclosed counter had been placed in the center of the fiction department in an effort to contain an old electrical outlet box protruding from the floor. Mr. Dutton could not look at this eyesore without seeing a customer lawsuit for damages caused by accidental tripping. Upon his promotion to general manager in the 1930s, Dutton had immediately ordained that the front cash area be relocated and built around the box. This configuration had turned out to be of great benefit to the staff. One could always spot a customer coming from any direction, prepare the appropriate response to expressions ranging from confused to hostile, and even catch the surreptitious slip of an unpurchased book into a handbag. Other bookshops had taken note of Bloomsbury Books' ground floor design and started refurbishing their own. The entire neighborhood was in this way full of spies. Grace and Vivian were not the only two bookstore employees out and about, checking on the other stores' window displays. London was starting to boom again after 5 long years of post-war rationing and recovery, and new bookshops were popping up all over. Bloomsbury was home to the British Museum, the University of London, and many famous authors past and present, including the pre-war circle of Virginia Woolf, E.M. Forster, and Lytton Strachey. This made the district a particularly ideal location for readers, authors, and customers alike. And so it was here, on a lightly snowing day, on the 2nd of January, 1950, that a young Evie Stone arrived, Mr. Allen's trading card in one pocket and a one-way train ticket to London in the other.
Thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. And as we talked about before we came on live, Natalie said these words. It's, for us, a reader, having an author read their own words is as close as we can get to the voice that was meant to come across. And I also, though, want to compliment your Audible narrator. I've been doing a combination of, with all my travels, listening on Audible and also hopping in the book myself. And you're absolutely right. Very theatrical, very enjoyable. With that, I have a quick question just regarding something totally marketing or publishing-ish. A friend of mine that's in our book club is in Grand Junction, and she happens to be reading the large print version of the book, and it has a totally different cover.
I love that cover, the teacup on the book.
Yes, yes. So what happened with that, and why does that sometimes happen? I've had this conversation with a few other authors. I think one who just joined us, Sarah McCraw-Crow, about how the publishers change the art, or you do, or how does that all work?
They'll change it for the paperback too. I mean, I think what's happening is they're very much thinking about their particular market and what their market will respond to. And I think that with large print, the market that they're gearing to is I want to say more like wide ranging in a way. Whereas I think for my publisher to build success for this kind of book, you have to kind of allot it with a genre in terms of getting on lists. There's a lot of built-in pressure, right, to get some attention in the marketplace because so many great books come out every week. Oh my goodness. Like the week my book came out, it was like Stephen King, Curtis Sinfeld, Elin Hilderbrand, Scott Turow, John Grisham. Like I was like, what am I doing? I don't belong here. And it was really kind of frightening. But so I think with historical fiction, there's these tropes, right? Of like the flowers and the backs of the women. And actually, it's the funny story is that I said, I didn't care what they did for my cover. I deferred to them, but I just didn't want like a lot of backs of people. And then they gave me the Jane Austen Society and it was like 5 backs. I was like, are you trying to give me a heart attack? Like, what are you doing? But the minute I looked at it, after about 5 seconds, I got it. And I was like, oh, this is the perfect cover. And I love all my covers. But so with Bloomsbury Girls, they're walking forward and it has that post-war energy, that forward momentum, and they're bonded together and they're supporting each other. And so it's got this great energy to it. So I think with the large print, for example, I think that there's that cozy, the teacup and the old classic leather-bound books and the smoky background and the tea smoke is, steam is rising and it gives it a very nice cozy feel, which I think probably appeals to the market of the people that it's really going to be a library copy, the large print. It's really going to be, in the libraries, and the foreign editions are all different as well. So the edition for Italy for Bloomsbury Girls is fantastic. It's the shop, and then the top 3 windows, there's a silhouette of a different woman in each of the windows. And so every country is making choices based on their market. And that's why it's not a diss on the original cover. It's not saying we don't like it. It's more, this isn't what covers look like in our country. Like my Romanian cover for the Jane Austen Society doesn't look like any other cover I've ever seen. And when I went on the publisher website to find it, I saw that so many covers in Romania look like that. So it's a respect for the book buying public there and not criticism of the choices that your initial team made.
Awesome. Fantastic. We learned so much in our virtual book club here. You were right when you said you love the author chats, because every time we talk to someone, there can be similar themes, but it is almost different every time. Karen, what other question do you have for Natalie? And then we're going to do our final remarks pretty soon. Our time is flying by tonight.
Well, you kind of talk about what you're working on now. Is that we know what's coming up. I found it interesting. At the center of the Bloomsbury Girls is a book and a whole genre of literature, women's literature, that's being kind of excluded. It's not exactly banned, but it's sort of being ignored into oblivion. And I find that interesting, given the times that we're in right now. I don't know what's going on in Canada, but maybe you've heard about some of what's going on in the United States, and particularly in Texas. And you hit so many issues in your book in terms of, homophobia, racism, immigration, all. You kind of hit them all. Yeah. And I wonder what your thoughts about that are in this, given the times that we're in. Did you know that was coming when you were writing, or was it already going on? Maybe, I don't know.
No. I mean, I've always known that there's always this tension in society with information, because information is power. And the more open education is, the more open literature is, the more accessible everything is. There's always going to be a tension, I think, between certain kinds of government, certain kinds of rulers, certain kinds of people, and how much do I want people to know about things, right? How much do I want to leave it up completely to them? That's the basic tension. And, parents have responsibilities, teachers and librarians have responsibilities, but the outright, what I understand is going on is like the outright banning, right? Of saying like this book cannot be carried is, that's, to me, is just always that slippery slope, right? I mean, unless something is, I'm a lawyer, right? So in Canada, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Unless something is causing harm or inciting harm to somebody else, I come from, and I think my book reflects that generosity of spirit that you are articulating, which is that sense of, I want to operate on the premise of the hope that with the right support and education, people will find their way through the information they are given, and they will find what resonates. Sorry, I get a little emotional. Find what resonates for them, what helps them through their own unique human struggles. And that if we cut off avenues for people to access information, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, we are making some people's lives harder. And that's where I come at this from. And I think that's what my book is trying to convey as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Natalie, for taking time out of your busy schedule, your busy life, to sit down with my virtual book club. And thank you for giving us inspiration of what is coming out for you and what to go back to read. I think my final question would be, what is on your nightstand, or who would you recommend to us in the short term, if you were wanting to give a shout out to some of your other author friends?
These are books that are coming out in 4 months. And I know that it's Christmas, so I'm going to just work on the premise that you're all going to be busy with other things. And then January is going to come around and you're going to want these books. So Daughters of Nantucket by Julie Gerstenblatt is one of the best debut historical fiction books I think I've ever read. It's incredible. This House is on Fire by Rachel Beanland, who had a beautiful book. Florence Adler's Swimming. I can't remember, it was the first year of the pandemic. I can't get the title quite right. It is about a true historic fire that burned down a theater in Richmond, Virginia in the early 19th century. Incredible. Karen multi-voice. And so is Julie's book, Daughters of Nantucket. And Once We Were Home by Jennifer Rosner, which she was nominated for a National Jewish Book Award for her debut, The Yellow Bird Sings, is incredible story of four different characters' voices of children who have been separated from home during the Holocaust and are making their way to Israel. And they are being separated sometimes from the families that were Catholic that raised them, that were Jewish that raised, it's that displacement. And The Dust Child by Kwame Noe Stan. Her debut is The Mountains Sing, which if you have heard of, but you have, it's incredible. And Dust Child is her next book. And of course, Sarah Penner's follow-up to The Lost Apothecary, that monster hit, which is the London Seance Society. And there's one other there. They are all releasing in within 2 weeks of each other in March. Wow. And it is just going to be a historical fiction goldmine. And if you can enter Goodreads giveaways contest for these books, if you can pre-order them through your local indie, I highly recommend it. And I recommend that you read them all. It's just incredible.
Can I bother you for one last piece of work? Would you be able to type them all in the chat from this in the virtual book club, or just send me an email and then I will, because
I feel like
everyone
I've
asks
gotten a sixth one. So I'm going to write them all down for you and then you can share them. Yeah.
Okay. Please do that, and then we'll make sure we don't lose anything in translation, because I was writing down as fast as I could.
I talk fast. It's okay.
It's wonderful. Karen, do you want to have a closing remark? Again, Natalie, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Well, it's been a thrill for me to be able to talk with you, Natalie. I love your book, and I'm definitely going to read the first one and the next one. And I hope it's not your last one. I hope you keep going. You said that your love of books connects us and comforts us, brings even saves us in challenging times, and then also the community that creates is one of the greatest sources of comfort and support. And I like to, one, thank you for writing books that give us that sense. And also I'd like to thank Susie for creating this book club, because you did just that through books. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you
Natalie,
so much.
You're welcome. We're going to let you go so you can go to your family and your rescue dogs, and peace to you, and I hope that every once in a while you might hop in the book club and just share something with us. Just know that it is a sense of community, and one of the things that's my biggest honor is a lot of times I watch who's watching, and a lot of times it is a group of authors and a few readers, and everybody catches the recording a little bit later on sometimes. So again, thank you, Natalie.
No, thank you all. Thank you so much for shining this light on my book and for inviting me here tonight. And I hope we can stay in touch with the third book. So take good care. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Natalie. Take care. Have a good night. Sorry, it's always so hard when I do the remove from stream. Sometimes I cut people off. So Karen, what did you think of your first virtual book club talk?
I really love this book. So I was thrilled to talk to her. So anyway, thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. You are so welcome. Well, basically, I just always like to chat a little bit at the end, make sure people are on track with what's coming up. And I have one cover to share with everyone. Several of you may have already purchased this when you came to the first Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway. But one of the books we're featuring this month in November is Our Princess Scribes. It's a work of it's just thoughts and gratitude from over 60 authors. We will be highlighting Jonathan Haupt, the executive director of the Pat Conroy Literary Center, will be talking on behalf of all the authors in this book. And we will be meeting with him, I believe, in the first part of December. I don't have that date right in front of me like I should. I apologize, but I will put that out. Definitely one to grab. It will be heartwarming for anyone in the, for sure, Beaufort area, but anyone that's a fan of Pat Conroy's work. The other, I'm going to try to share my screen. So give me a second as I try to do that. Bear with me just a second. I don't want to give you the wrong things. What are you seeing, if anything? Here we go. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, guys, it's been a long time coming. There's been a lot of behind the scenes conversations that I've had with this New York Times bestselling author, Karen White. She's based in Atlanta, Georgia, and we are reading one of her many books that are out. It's called The Shop on Royal Street. We are reading that book here in November and talking to her rather quickly. Bear with me just a second. I just want to pull up the reminder to this as well. Share screen and find it. There we go. So if everybody can see this, please mark your calendars for our conversation on November 17th. We'll be talking with Karen White about this book, The Shop on Royal, and she has the next book after this one coming out shortly. And then there's also a fantastic literary experience in New Orleans in May that is going to do somewhat similar to what I tried to create here in Beaufort, but on a much grander scale in New Orleans. I was going to be part of the organizational committee, but in all reality, they had it all put together to take place in 2021, and they didn't pull the trigger and do it because of restrictions still that were going on. So I said, I love this idea. This is something that's in my wheelhouse, and I just want to share it with my virtual book club members. And if there's any of you that want to participate, I know that the tickets are going to go quickly. So in the next day or two, I will put all the details of that New Orleans experience in our group. And I just wanted to let you know that we're reading The Shop on Royal, and then the next book that comes out is all based around New Orleans, which is pretty close to you, Karen. It's not too far away. And then the month of December, we're reading The Cicadas Tree by David Gwaltney, Gwaltney. He's recently received a ridership. I need to dig into what it means more. I'm sure he can tell us about it. But he is working through the Pat Conroy Center, and I think writing down here in the Beaufort area. So maybe I can coordinate an in-person interview for that to broadcast across StreamYard. That would be kind of fun to try to get out of the virtual world a little bit. But Karen, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think works within our virtual book club, and what would you like to see changed? And I'm reaching this question out to everyone watching still. I really want to see more interactivity when you can do it. I want to make sure that we're giving the authors the audience that they deserve. And frankly, over the last several months, I've watched our live numbers go down and our post views go down. So I need to kind of get some feedback from everybody just about what you're liking and what you might like to have changed.
One difference between now and when you started the book club, of course, is the change in the pandemic status.
Right, absolutely.
People's lives have gotten busy again, and there's things on the calendar.
Right.
And if you're like me, sometimes I'll remember about 15 minutes in to get on. I need to set an alarm or something. I enjoy the format. I've loved all the books that you've selected, or I don't know that you've selected them all, but they've been recommended to you and you've made them known to us. So thank you. And you've gotten me reading every month. I'm a person who has always loved books, but I have to confess I rarely sat down to read one because I had so many other things going on. And then now I'm reading a book a month. So thank you.
You're welcome. And then I've threw on two books. I need to pull that up as well. We're going to have I will put it back in our group. We have the makeup conversation with Susan Cushman, where I had some technical issues abroad. I couldn't get the StreamYard to even operate. But yeah, I am well aware that when we did start and we had, the high numbers and I even the huge virtual book clubs that I've watched, I noticed that, it's not as high as it used to be. But if there's something that I can do differently or incorporate differently to increase the overall activity, I'm totally open to that. It's not my book club, it's everybody's book club. And I think part of having you come on and Francine come on and Shoshana and Melissa, it's more people that want to do that, I think the better, because I think you really kind of feel that connection to the author. That how do you get that otherwise, unless you go to a book signing or a book event. That piece is really unique, I think.
How many are in the club now?
We're at 564. So
is that considered, do you know what the market is? Is that considered large or medium or small?
It's a fairly large Facebook group. I think one of the things, like any other social media thing I've learned is, I may be posting, but a lot of times you guys might not be seeing it. So I think one of the things that's important to do as a Facebook group member is just to mark all the bells and whistles or whatever to get notifications from our book club. And when you see me post, an upcoming live set, there is a thing you can click that says set a reminder, and it will send, because I test it on myself all the time, it'll send you a notification like 10 minutes before the actual live to kind of, encourage you to hop on and that kind of thing. But I think the more that we can all talk and converse and share it as a sense of a community, the better overall for all of us, I think.
Well, and I think certainly having the Low Country tour in the spring was a nice community builder. I enjoyed all the women on that.
Yeah, I did too. I would like to give kudos to, I think, my most frequent viewers. would say so Shoshana, number one for sure. You, Karen Dreyer. I also get a lot from Ginger Dwyer Osleski, who's here in Beaufort. And Sarah McCraw-Crow has been joining us a lot from up in New England, and Francine Katzen, of course, as well. And I like I said, I love it when I see the authors that pop back on. It's really fun to see the support that they have for one another, and that's always heartwarming. But at this point in time, again, let's all read the one that I have in front of me, Our Prince of Scribes, and I will post the date when Jonathan Haupt will be representing all the authors in here. And then, as I mentioned earlier, The House on Royal Street by Karen White. And we will be meeting with Karen in less than 2 weeks. So I would put that on the the top of the nightstand, and then The Prince of Scribes second, and get reading those this month. And you'll probably have a little extra time around making the turkey, maybe. All righty. Well, thank you, Karen, for joining me tonight. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast and stay in the studio for just a second and talk to you guys next time. Thanks, Karen.